Yes.
Are there what? It's like
Staying out late.
Oh yes, of course. Well,
I
I'm
don't
glad
actually
you're
know
still
about
here.
that.
I know that most of the people would probably either go home
Do you want to go to Brad's?
or
Right,
finish their
right.
thesis.
I think so.
I am going to Egypt.
I was looking at Yusuf's birthday.
For what?
For sightseeing. Yeah, I'm going to Egypt for spring break.
Really?
Yeah, as a reward too.
That's so awesome.
I know.
I'm going
Do
to
some
Puerto Rico.
preparation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You see any hieroglyphs? Copy them down for me, okay?
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, I'm leaving on Saturday.
that's exciting.
You know.
When are you turning your thesis in?
When?
When?
Thursday?
Thursday?
Yeah.
I have 2 midterms this week, unfortunately, so I was thinking about turning it in tomorrow.
Okay.
But where are you printing?
I think printing studios, basement of studios. I've had a count there. So.
Okay, I was going to do Science Center at like 5 a.m.
Yes,
When I was
it's
there.
kind of, I don't know.
Risky?
Sometimes, sometimes it's too many people.
Right, so I was going to go at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Because the late nighters will have gone to bed.
Can you use like your house printer?
It's not in color.
Oh, you need color. Is the Science Center in color?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well you can.
They are serious about the deadline.
Very.
If you
Serious.
miss the deadline, what?
You're... God, nightmare?
I don't know.
I don't know, we
It's
don't
not
think
your
about that.
mission.
Don't talk about that. We don't think about that.
It's as bad as plagiarism.
Oh,
Yeah.
nervous laugh.
Oh, thanks.
Wow. Very pretty much done.
Yeah, I have some formatting things to do.
When I did my thesis, undergraduate, I was about a month late. And I did so well and still got a distinction.
Oh.
So I did my undergraduate work in Taiwan, a college with only 600 students. In my department of Chinese studies, 7 concentrators, 12 teachers, 12 professors.
Wow.
So we always visit professors' place either around 11:30 or 5:30. So we'll be entertained for either lunch or dinner. Okay, let's begin. Let me make one announcement. Just to remind you, I've already announced it. We're going to have a conference in the morning for about 3 hours, probably even more, April 17th. So we're not going to have a class on April the 27th. So my suggestion is that we would take the ecological perspectives and the dialogue among civilizations and global ethic for that morning. Okay, we have enough time. I think probably we have more than an hour to discuss these issues. Then there will be a working lunch, and you can take part on a voluntary basis for further discussion. Now we're moving to what I call the second epoch of Confucian humanism. Originally, I made a general description. We can talk about the 3 epochs of Confucian humanism. The first one from the birth of Confucius in the 6th century to about the 3rd century AD. Of course, we should remind ourselves a great deal had already happened before the birth of Confucius, so far as Confucianism is concerned. And then the introduction of Buddhism from the 1st century then became important in China for a few centuries. So around 11th century to 19th century, we talk about the second epoch. The first epoch is could be understood as the development of a local culture in Confucius' birthplace, a very small place, and then became the main tradition of China, or you can say China proper. And the second epoch began in the 11th, 19th century as part of Chinese culture, then evolved into East Asian civilization, including Vietnam, and now we should include the Chinese diaspora, Chinese outside of China proper. And some people want to also include East Asian diaspora, including Koreans and Japanese who move all around the world. Their value system is still shaped in a significant way by the Confucian tradition. Then whether this third epoch or not, you should have a question mark. From the 19th century, when Confucianism became really marginalized by some of the most brilliant minds in China, so whether there's possibility of a third epoch from, let's say, in the 21st century or beyond. If it happens, I think it's happening in a very limited way, that Confucianism is in the process of evolving from an integral part of East Asian studies to become a global phenomenon. There are only three major spiritual traditions that can be considered as globally significant. And as you know, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. Each one of them can assume so many different cultural forms, and each of them is globally significant. It's whether Confucianism will become part of that group or not, we don't know. And yet I want to make one point, which is highly personal, but I think I can justify it. You know, I made a clear distinction between personal and private. That's not my private thought. That's my personal interpretation, which can be, which I would like to have it debated. It's discussable. It should be made accountable, and in a way, it can be also persuasive. That is the Confucian tradition, perhaps, is the most, in terms of human history in the last 250 years, the most influential traditions in human history. More than Christianity, more than Islam, because they all started very late. The Confucian tradition started more than 1,000 years before Christianity emerged, and of course many more centuries later when Islam emerged as an important. And certainly the Confucian tradition also predated Buddhism. This is one reason, it had a much longer period. The second reason is, unlike all the other spiritual traditions, Confucianism intended by Confucius to be an integral part of society as a whole. So it's not only interested in those people who aspire to a spiritual tradition beyond the world. So the tradition was involved in politics, in society. And also it covered not only the elite, but also the populace. And of course, one very simple reason is the Chinese population is huge. And of course, it also include Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, and Chinese diasporas or East Asian diasporas. The scope is incredible. So the irony, one of the most influential, perhaps the most influential traditions, you can say ethical, spiritual, political traditions based upon your interpretation, turned out to be the least powerful in terms of major, we call it axial age civilizations. Did I use the term axial age before? Which means, roughly speaking, from the 6th century to the 10th century BC. And some of the great traditions emerged on the surface independently. Hinduism and Buddhism in South Asia, Confucianism and Taoism in East Asia, and Judaism in the Middle East. And of course, Judaism contributed to the development of Christianity and Islam. That's one observation. When I say the second epoch, we moved already from the classical period to the second epoch. In the classical period, we already encounter some of the most important minds. Confucius, his grandson, Zhi, the author of the Doctrine of the Ming, Mencius, and Wing-tsit. So in this period, some of the basic values, we call the core values of the Confucian tradition, had already been fully developed and fully discussed, or you can say embodied in the teachings of these people, including humanity, rightness, propriety, or civility, wisdom, and trust. Another thing was already the scope was very extensive, from the family to the community, to nation, to all under heaven, even beyond. In other words, the Confucian tradition is not, I call it anthropocentric. You can even imagine not only the community of the world or the global community, but the community of the living, or integral part of the cosmic order. And I also mentioned a number of other things. The Confucian tradition is not a way. It's not only a way, which means a very basic value orientations. It's also a scholarly tradition. So by